The story actually started with a terrible moment a dozen years back during the invasion of Iraq, when the helicopter we were traveling in was forced down after being hit by an RPG. Our traveling NBC News team was rescued, surrounded, and kept alive by an armored mechanized platoon from the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry.
So that explanation from NBC News anchor Brian Williams coming after his story about coming under fire in Iraq, sparking an even backlash. As you can imagine, there's a lot of reaction from the military, including that from Amber Smith, a former U.S. Army helicopter pilot who did take fire in Iraq, now a senior military advisor at Concerned Veterans for America. And thank you, Amber Smith, for being a part of our program today. We're getting a lot of veterans to weigh in on this. What is your view based on what you've heard so far?
Look, I respect the work that Brian Williams has done for veterans. I commend him for that. Everybody makes mistakes and everybody deserves a second chance. But Brian Williams' second chance came in 2004 when he could have stopped this story dead in its tracks. And instead, he continued for over a decade to embellish the story to the point where in 2013, he went on the Dave Letterman's show and said he was in the helicopter that got hit with the RPG and did a hard landing because of it, and said that he felt like his life was in danger and he almost died. That is embellishing and stealing another soldier's story. The event actually happened, just Brian Williams wasn't a part of it.
Now, what he talked about was the fog of war. And you would admit, too, the fog of war is real. So
it absolutely is.
Is it possible to confuse these events?
Well, the fog of war is real, especially from my perspective as a Kiowa pilot. You've got the friendly situation, the enemy situation. You're flying a helicopter, talking on a handful of radios. And, when you add enemy fire into the mix, it's a very high stress, high adrenaline environment. So that can cause some of the details to be muddled. But let me tell you, when your aircraft gets hit by enemy fire and someone is trying to take your life and kill you, you don't forget it. There's no aftermath of you and your pilot saying, did that happen to me? Did we just get hit by enemy fire? No, you remember it. You know exactly what happened. And also, as a passenger in the back of a Chinook, which is what he was in, unless he was plugged into the cockpit, which from everything that we've heard, it doesn't sound like he was, if they took small arms fire, he likely never knew it unless the pilot did some sort of an evasive maneuver or he saw the damage to the aircraft itself. So him using fog of war doesn't make sense.
On small arms fire, but an RPG, you would certainly, there's no mistaking that. Well, what Williams said was, you are absolutely right and I was wrong. Based on your first two answers, you don't accept his apology, do you?
Well, I think he deserves to give the American people more than that. They trusted him as a journalist, and it's part of your job characteristic as a journalist to have integrity. And I mean, job application. Do you tell the truth and report the truth in stories, or do you fabricate them and embellish stories? That's something that you have to have is integrity, and I think that is lost. So this is not a fog of war story. This is at the time, combat journalist who stole another soldier's combat story, who, by the way, is lucky enough to be alive, and he stole that story for career advancement or for whatever reason, bragging rights, it doesn't matter. He used someone else's story for his own benefit. You know what happened in March of 2003? This is the early hours, the early days of the war in Iraq, and what he reported then on Dateline and NBC, quote, on the ground, we learned the Chinook ahead of us was almost blown out of the sky. So that was his initial description of his own experience. Yeah, it sounds like that's what I said when it comes to second chances. In the beginning, he wasn't making these claims, and it just, as time went on, he continued to embellish the story to the point where, on the Dave Letterman show, he was in the helicopter and saw it go down, or went down with the helicopter. And that was on the 10-year anniversary of that day. Yep. Amber Smith, thank you for coming in today. Certainly respect your view, and we'll see what happens now. Apparently, an NBC spokesperson earlier today said there will be no suspension or punishment for Williams, and he was on the air last night in reference to it. We'll watch and see where this story goes from here. Amber Smith, thanks for your time.